4, 3, 2, 1, go. Hello, my name is Rick. Welcome to Origin. This channel is about a philosophy for living deliberately in an uncertain world. We explore virtue, rationality, intentionality, and how to put them into practice through what we think, say, and do. Origin isn't a finished doctrine. It's a framework we examine, question, and refine together. Today, I want to talk about how we turn the principles of origin into behavior. I call them the three practices. In the last video, I talked about the three pillars of origin: virtue, rationality, intentionality. Virtue asks, what is good? Rationality asks, what is true? And intentionality asks, what am I going to do about it? Those three pillars give us a framework. But there is an obvious problem here. You can understand a philosophy perfectly and still fail to live according to it. You can believe courage is important and still behave cowardly when courage is actually required. You can value rationality and still believe something simply because you desperately want it to be true. You can talk endlessly about living intentionally while spending most of your life reacting to whatever demands your attention next. So if origin is going to be useful, it has to move from ideas into behavior. It has to become something we can actually practice. This is what I want to talk about today. I call these things the three practices. They are thinking, speaking, acting. These are the three fundamental ways that we engage with ourselves, other people, and the world around us. So let us start with the first practice. Let's talk about thinking. Before we speak, before we act, and before we make most decisions, something happens inside of our minds. We perceive something. We interpret it. We form beliefs about it. We make judgments. And then we respond. The problem is that human thinking is not automatically rational. We are biased. We are emotional. We are influenced by our previous experiences. We see patterns that may not actually exist. We sometimes believe things because everyone around us believes them. And human beings are remarkably good at finding reasons to justify conclusions we already wanted to believe. So the first practice of origin is thinking rationally. What does that actually mean? It starts with a simple question. What do I actually know? Not what do I suspect, not what I am afraid might be true, not what do I want to be true. What do I actually know? Then ask, what am I assuming? That is an incredibly useful question, because sometimes what causes us the most anger, fear, or frustration is not what actually happened. It is the story we created around what happened. Imagine you send someone a text message. They do not respond. That is the event. Then your mind begins constructing explanations. They are deliberately ignoring me. They are angry with me. They don't respect me. Maybe, but those things do not necessarily follow from the fact that they have not responded. Those are interpretations. Maybe they are correct. Maybe they are not. Thinking rationally means learning to distinguish between what happened and what we believe happened. Then there is another important question. What would change my mind? That can be a really difficult question because we don't actually know. Because if the answer is genuinely nothing, then we may no longer be reasoning. We may simply be defending a belief. Origin does not ask us to become emotionless. Emotion is a part of our human nature. Emotions can contain useful information, but feeling something very strongly does not make it true. So thinking rationally means examining our own thinking. It means being capable of saying, I might be wrong. And when the evidence tells us that we are wrong, we change our minds. That is the first practice. Think rationally. But eventually our thoughts become communication. So let us move to the second practice. Let's talk about speaking. Language is one of the most powerful tools human beings possess. With words, we can teach, we can cooperate, we can preserve knowledge across generations, we can resolve conflicts, we can comfort someone, we can persuade, we can make promises, we can tell someone that we love them, we can communicate an idea to someone who may carry that idea somewhere we never could. But words can also deceive, they can humiliate, they can manipulate, they can inflame, they can destroy trust. And sometimes we speak without thinking about why we are speaking at all. So the second practice of origin is this: speak intentionally. What does that even mean? Before speaking, particularly when something important is happening, ask, what am I trying to communicate? Imagine you were arguing with someone. Are you trying to understand them? Are you trying to persuade them? Are you trying to solve the actual problem? Or are you trying to win? Are you trying to make the other person look stupid? Are you saying something because it needs to be said? Or are you angry and trying to hurt them? These are all very different intentions. Recognizing our actual intention can completely change the way that we communicate. Speaking intentionally does not always mean being polite. It does not mean being passive. And it does not mean avoiding conflict. Sometimes intentional speech should be direct. Sometimes you need to tell someone they are wrong. Sometimes you need to say no. Sometimes you need to establish a boundary. Sometimes you need to defend yourself. Sometimes you need to defend someone else. Sometimes you need to say something another person does not want to hear. The question is not, will this make everyone comfortable? The question is, why am I saying this, and what am I trying to accomplish? And this is where the three pillars begin working together inside the three practices. Rationality asks, is what I'm saying true? Intentionality asks, why am I saying it? Virtue asks, how should I say it? And sometimes after asking these questions, the intentional thing is to not to speak at all. Silence can be deliberate as well. That is the second practice. Speak intentionally. Now let us move to the third practice, because eventually our thoughts and words have to encounter reality. They have to encounter the world. Eventually we have to do something. Let's talk about action. You can think beautiful thoughts. You can say beautiful things, but eventually your philosophy has to survive contact with your behavior. So the third practice of origin is virtuously. This is where the four cardinal virtues from the previous video become practical: wisdom, courage, justice, temperance. Wisdom asks whether your action reflects good judgment. Courage asks whether you are willing to do what you believe is right when doing so becomes difficult or costly. Justice asks how your actions affect other people and whether you are treating them fairly. Temperance asks whether you are governing yourself or simply obeying an impulse. And this is where philosophy becomes tangible. If I claim generosity matters but never help anyone, what does that belief accomplish? If I claim honesty matters but lie whenever telling the truth becomes inconvenient, then honesty is not really one of my practiced values. If I say courage matters but abandon my principles whenever they become costly, there is a gap between what I say I value and how I actually live. Origin is concerned with closing that gap. Not perfectly. Nobody lives according to their principles at every moment of their life. I certainly don't. The goal is not perfection. The goal is alignment. Can we progressively bring what we say, what we think, and what we do into greater alignment with the person we are deliberately trying to become? That is the third practice. Act virtuously. So now we have all three. Think rationally, Speak intentionally, act virtuously. But I want to clarify something important. These are not rigid categories. I am not saying rationality only applies to thinking. Obviously, we should act rationally. I'm not saying intentionality applies only to speaking. We should think and act intentionally. And virtue should influence all three of these. The three practices are a framework. They translate the three pillars into something simple enough that we can actually remember when life becomes complicated. Because when something difficult happens, I don't want to have to remember an entire philosophical book. I want something I can actually use. 3 words: think, speak, act. And 3 principles guiding them: rationality, intentionality, virtue. So what does that look like in ordinary life, ordinary days? Let us walk through an example. Imagine someone says something that makes you angry, like really mad. Your immediate impulse might be to respond. Maybe you want to send a message. Maybe you want to say something back. Maybe you want to retaliate. There is a small space between what happened and what you do next. That space matters because that is where deliberate choice becomes possible. First, think rationally. What actually happened here? Did I understand the person correctly? Am I reacting to what they actually said? Or am I reacting to what I assumed they meant? Could there be another explanation? Then, speak intentionally. What am I trying to accomplish? Do I want clarification? Do I want to establish a boundary? Do I want to correct something? Do I want to solve the disagreement? Or do I simply want to hurt the other person because I am angry? Then, act virtuously. What does wisdom require here? What does courage require? What does justice require? What does temperance require? And origin does not necessarily tell you what the answer will be. Maybe you confront the person. Maybe you apologize. Maybe you walk away. Maybe you discover that you misunderstood them. Maybe you discover that you were wrong. Different circumstances can produce different answers. Origin is not trying to provide a rule book containing the correct response to every possible human situation that we encounter. That would be impossible. What it can provide is a method for constructing a response. And that distinction is important. There is another reason I use the word practice. Nobody permanently masters these things. You practice rational thinking because sometimes you will think irrationally. You practice intentional speech because sometimes you will say something and immediately wish you could take it back. You practice virtuous action because sometimes you will fail to live according to your own principles. Failure does not invalidate the practice. What matters is what happens after. Ask yourself, what happened? Why did I respond that way? What were the consequences? How can I learn from this? What will I do differently next time? Then try again. And something interesting happens when we do that repeatedly. Actions become habits. Habits influence character. Character influences future choices. You do not become courageous by agreeing that courage is good. You become more courageous by practicing courage when opportunities for courage appear. You do not become rational simply because you value reason. You become more rational by repeatedly questioning your own assumptions and correcting your mistakes. And you do not build an intentional life through one enormous decision. You build it through thousands of smaller, deliberate decisions. This is why origin is ultimately supposed to be something we practice, not something we merely believe. In fact, I am not particularly interested in the question, Do you believe in origin? I think there is a better question. Does this framework help you live better? Does it help you understand reality more clearly? Does it help you communicate more deliberately? Does it help you make better decisions? Does it help you become the person you are trying to become? If it does, use it. If it does not, examine why. And if we discover something better, we should learn from it. So where does this leave us? We now have 2 layers of origin. The 3 pillars tell us what should guide us: virtue, rationality, intentionality. And the 3 practices describe where those principles enter everyday life: thinking, speaking, acting. Put them together and we get something very simple. Think rationally, speak intentionally, act virtuously. But there is still a problem here. You can have principles, you can practice them, you can make plans, and the world can still surprise you. Something happens that you never expect. Your circumstances change. Your plans collapse. Suddenly, none of the choices in front of you are the choices you wanted. What do you do then? This brings us to the next part of origin: agency and deliberate response. What does it mean to possess agency in a world that we don't control? And how can we respond deliberately when we cannot know what happens next? This is what I want to talk about in the next video. Thank you for watching. If you found something valuable here, please like the video and subscribe to the channel. That helps others people who are interested in these ideas find origin. And if this made you think of someone who might find it valuable too, share it with them. Origin is something we are going to continue exploring, questioning, and developing together. Until next time, think rationally, speak intentionally, act virtuously.